It started in the basement of St. Timothy's Church, somewhere on the east side of Los Angeles, in a room that smelled of old hymnals and burnt coffee. We gathered for meetings every third Sunday, the community council, though it was mostly an excuse for the older folks to discuss gossip under the guise of looking out for one another. I was 22, pale with nerves and disbelief, listening to my own mother tell the group about my new career. She stood, hands clasped in front of her waist, like she was holding a prayer. Miguel wants to be she stopped, looking for the words, a data artist. Then she glanced at me, as if challenging me to correct her. I said nothing. My uncle Jorge coughed out a snort of laughter. So, computers, but make it pretty? He said, eyes shining, voice loud enough to echo off the cinder blocks. Art is for after hours, said Mrs. Robles, who ran a daycare out of her garage. Honey, people don't pay for that. It's not a job, it's a hobby. Like knitting. The room became a current, the electricity in the air unspoken but everywhere. My father said nothing, just ran a thumb along the side of his coffee mug as if smoothing out invisible wrinkles. My sister Carmen was already scrolling through her phone, eyes half-lidded. I tried to say something, maybe explain how it was about telling stories with numbers, how cities glowed on screens not with colors but with meaning. But my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Instead, my cousin Elena said, "He could always help you with taxes, Tia." Laughter. I smiled so they would think I found it funny too. Father Martinez looked at me over his glasses, his gaze gentle but commanding, the way only priests can do. Miguel, sometimes God leads us by strange paths, but we must make sure we're not mistaking our own wishes for his calling. He meant well, I think. At the time, it felt like one more nail in the door I was trying to open. Afterward, my mother carpooled home with Mrs. Robles so she could chat, which really meant spill over about how worried she was. I walked home alone. The sidewalk was torn and the jacarandas were in bloom, purple blossoms crushed into bruises under my shoes. A kind of grief set in, tight and clean like a fresh cut. The world shrank to a small, hard ache in my chest. But somewhere underneath ran a deep, icy thread of clarity. I wasn't wrong about the power in what I wanted. They just couldn't see it yet. The next years blurred together as one long, stubborn effort. I took any tech gig that paid, even the mindless ones, data entry for a real estate agency, then scraping addresses for a lawyer who called me the spreadsheet kid. After hours, in my rented room over the coin laundry, I built strange glowing landscapes on my laptop. The movement of buses in the city at night, the shape of smog over the freeways, riots turning into color-washed shapes, police radios mapped in real time. I'd share them on forums and on Twitter accounts no one followed. Every like still felt like a small punch through the crust of obscurity. My mother called often, voice tight with hope or disappointment, hard to say. A bank job opened up, she'd mention, half suggestion, half command. Miss Robles' cousin can put in a word for you. Sometimes I'd say I'd think about it. Sometimes I'd say nothing at all. The gap between us grew wide as a river. My father, always the quiet one, called less. Sometimes I'd hear him in the background, shuffling cards and not saying anything. Out in the community, word got around that I was still between things. Freelance made people's eyes glaze over, a polite word for failure. At my sister's graduation, I overheard two aunts whisper, "He's so smart. It's such a shame, really." Sometimes, late at night, I'd open job listings for real careers. I imagined what it'd be like to be the kind of person who simply did the safe thing, who clocked in and out, who ate lunch with coworkers and went home to a cat. But whenever I tried, my mind fogged over with unease. Clarity again. If I quit now, I'd fold into the invisible cracks, disappear like a mistake. I can't pinpoint when it changed. Maybe it was the night I posted my smog visual, a time-lapse from sunrise to dusk, smog painted in veins of orange and black over the city, punctuated by tiny gold pulses for each medical emergency call. I called it Breathing LA. It went viral, at least by my standards. Local news picked it up, then an email from a place called Verity Lab. We saw your interpretation of city data. Would you like to collaborate? I remember staring at my screen, the light cold and blue, fingers shaking over the keyboard. The offer wasn't riches, but it was real. So unexpectedly real that it pressed tears out of me before I even wrote back. Verity Lab lived in a downtown loft, tucked above a vegan donut shop. The walls were all white brick and plants, a world so sharply unlike the church basement, I wondered if I'd woken up somewhere else. They wanted more than pretty pictures. They wanted insight, stories hidden in millions of lines of code. Nothing dry, said Janine, the director. Can you make people feel what the data is saying? I could. I did. 3 months later, we released a piece mapping LA's evictions, huge, shimmering red swells pushing black dots of families out from the city's core. The LA Times ran it alongside an editorial. City Hall called to ask if we'd consult for their housing crisis report. Soon I was on panels downtown, echoing auditoriums, nervous sweat drying under my jacket as the artful data guy. Each new project, the noise grew. Podcasts, radio interviews, magazine profiles. But back home in Boyle Heights, I was still the kid who didn't have a real job. I bought my mother an iPad, loaded with all my work, but she used it mostly to Skype with family in Zacatecas. My father watched One Piece, an animation of immigrant journeys twisting across the LA map, and he silently patted my shoulder. That was it. My phone filled with voices from the neighborhood. Hey, I saw your thing on TV. Is that stable work? Are there benefits? How long do you think you'll do it for? Questions dressed up as concern, but the doubt never fully washed out. At weddings and funerals, introductions sounded like excuses. He works on the computer, does graphs. I think abashed, as if I'd failed but still deserved pity, I kept working. Each project demanded more from me. More time, more truth, more of my own anger and exhaustion. Some days the pressure of making something important enough felt unbearable. Yet the city, the real one, the concrete and chaos outside, seemed to lean into the clarity of my maps. Planners called it innovative. Protesters called it evidence. For a while, I was written about more than I was invited home. After 5 years that changed me from the inside out, Verity was invited to do a special exhibition as part of LA's citywide Arts Month. Not just a gallery, the centerpiece. They offered me a full hour, prime time, at the County Museum's open atrium. There would be families, city councilors, journalists, random bus riders off Wilshire. I said yes, of course. But as I stood on the threshold of the museum that night, watching guests line up, I realized how much I wanted my own people to see it, not just through a screen, not as some passing news item, but in the living, moving light of the city I loved. I called my mother, the first real invitation I'd given in years. I sent group texts to aunts, cousins, even Mrs. Robles. The atrium was all marble and glass, LA's dusk bleeding gold through the high windows. The crowd filled every row of folding chairs, conversations rising and breaking like surf. My hands shook as I checked the projector for the 10th time. I spotted my mother and father near the back, my sister with 2 friends, Uncle Jorge in a pressed checkered shirt. Even Father Martinez was there, collar white, hands folded. The old community council, dispersed through the crowd like bitters in a drink. When the lights dimmed, I stepped forward, the brightness of the screen behind me making everything flatten, as if I were both present and only a shadow. Cities speak, I began. They speak in numbers, in patterns we live inside but rarely see. Tonight, let me show you what Los Angeles says, through us, about us. Screens rose, spanning the atrium. Electric light painted the walls with shifting maps, bus movements in neon, rents swelling like red tides, heartbeats of protests pulsing down First Street. I talked about what every line meant, the real stories inside each cluster. I showed images burst across the marble, school kids walking under highways, abuelitas sitting in front yards as the world turned gold and gray, everyone breathing the same air, their own patterns visible and heartbreakingly beautiful. As I finished, I turned from the mic and looked for my mother. Her hands were pressed over her mouth, eyes shining. My father nodded, unsmiling, but I saw something at the corners of his eyes. Pride, raw and unhidden. Uncle Jorge's jaw worked, as if chewing over apology or revelation. Mrs. Robles wiped under her eyes.